In the past, I worked nights as a security guard in a medium-sized New Jersey corporate office complex. Additionally, the nights were generally calm, uninteresting, and uneventful. That's why the events of that one night have stayed so clear in my memory for years. Around midnight, when everyone had left the building and the foyer was deserted save for me, it began. Only the light from the security monitors and me. My work was easy. Check the cameras, go on a few patrols, record any occurrences, and mainly just sit and keep an eye out for anything out of the ordinary. The figure moving between the cars on the lower garage feed caught my attention right away because the lot should have been completely empty at this hour. That night, I was going about my regular business, looking at the screens for the elevators, the hallways, and the underground parking garage. Only those having 24-hour access were allowed inside, and I was aware that none had it at the time. I initially believed it might have been a member of the cleaning staff or one of the late shift IT guys, but it didn't make sense because the man wasn't wearing a uniform or carrying any equipment and cleaning crews had already left hours earlier. He wasn't going to any specific automobile or the exit, and he was dressed in a long, dark coat that seemed a bit big. He simply proceeded slowly, circling the rows as if he were checking the area or making sure nobody was there, and I got chills from something about the way he moved. It was off, but I couldn't pinpoint it. I described what I was witnessing to the supervisor over the phone. I followed his instructions to stay at my station and watch the cameras, but I had a gut feeling that I should check it out in person. I took out my flashlight and made my way to the garage. I was more nervous than I wanted to admit because the elevator ride was lengthy and seemed to reverberate in the shaft with each floor that went by. I used my flashlight to survey the lot when the doors on the garage level opened. It was deserted and utterly silent, the kind of silence that smothers your ears. It makes every tiny creak in the building seem enormous. "Hello, security here," I yelled. However, I heard no response, and the echo came back empty. I moved gently through the lines of automobiles, illuminating every shadowy nook and every gap between cars, but nothing was there. Not one individual, not one shadow. My heart was pounding, and I began to question my abilities, wondering if the camera was broken or if it had captured an imaginary shadow. I tried to shake it off by going back upstairs to the lobby. However, he was standing in the same location as before, as if he hadn't moved since I had been there. When I sat down again and turned to face the garage, knowing that I had just been there made my stomach drop. Furthermore, unless he had been observing me, or worse, waiting for me, he could not have returned to the same location undetected. My boss warned me not to approach him unless absolutely required, after I radioed him once more to let him know I would continue to monitor the cameras, which, given that I could untake my eyes off of him and my mind was already analyzing every scenario, was easier said than done. I observed him moving slowly in the direction of the stairs leading to the upper levels for the next 20 minutes. My stomach didn't growl when he proceeded cautiously, stopped, and glanced over his shoulder as if he was looking for someone. He suddenly vanished from the camera right before he reached the door. Every other feed was examined: elevator lobbies, hallways, and even rooftop access. Furthermore, nothing was present. There was absolutely no sign of him, which only made me feel worse because he couldn't have disappeared so quickly. And I got the unsettling impression that he was either concealing himself in a way that I could unsee or that he somehow had entry to the building. Heart racing, I remained at my desk until the lobby elevator dinged and opened. There was no one inside, but I could see damp footsteps on the smooth floor that led from the elevator to the main lobby. Bare feet, which was incorrect on several levels because he would have needed to remove his shoes in order to walk barefoot in the frigid weather. I stopped when I realized that he could be anywhere in the building if he was there now. Additionally, any office or storage space that was unlocked may be used as a hiding place. I considered shutting myself in the lobby and calling the local off-site patrol for help, but something inside of me told me I needed to run a patrol and make sure everything was in order, which was probably a mistake in hindsight. After riding the elevator to the 5th level, I began to carefully make my way down the hallway while holding a flashlight and looking at each office door to see if anyone was moving. I jumped at every water course in the building. One of the office doors was slightly open halfway down the corridor, which shouldn't have happened because it was always locked at night. With my torch, I pushed it open and looked inside. But the only things in the room were a chair tucked in beneath the desk and a computer display that was asleep. Nothing more. I heard footsteps on the flooring behind me as I stepped out into the hall once more and froze. Not mine, Hefty, damp, and asymmetrical, rapidly approaching me. I swept my flashlight along the hall, catching sight of the dark coat at the end as my heart leaped into my throat. Although he wasn't running, he was moving quickly and deliberately, and every time I looked at the cameras, I realized that he had been following me the entire time, hiding just out of sight. I bounded past the handrail, barely registering it banging against my arm as I ran down the corridor toward the stairway. The footsteps were so close that I could now clearly hear them reverberating through the hallway, and I became aware that I didn't know how he had entered. He had no notion what he wanted, and the fear was nearly overwhelming. As the footsteps thudded on the floor above, I jumped into the staircase, slid down a few steps, and closed the door behind me. They then came to a sudden stop, and for several minutes I sat there gasping for air while trying to convince myself that I was dreaming. However, the echo of those footsteps and the sound of my own breathing drove me crazy. When the patrol finally showed there, I was shaking, sweating, and pallid. Together, we went floor by floor and room by room through the building. The garage was deserted. No footprints. No indication of the intruder. My skin crawled even more when we discovered that the video from when he first appeared had been distorted or wiped, leaving a gap in the tape. Within a month, I left that position. I couldn't bear to wander the corridors by myself any longer, in part due to the fear. Every shadow and sound reminded me of him waiting behind me, just out of sight, especially when the garage was deserted and the wind outside made the structure creak. Years later, I still get nervous in parking garages and office buildings at night and look over my shoulder more often than I should because I fear that I might see that long coat coming around a corner or hear those wet footsteps behind me once more. Furthermore, I am aware that what I went through wasn't supernatural. It wasn't a phantom or a faceless ghost. The stalker was a real person, and every time I think back on that night, I'm still plagued by the idea that he might have been following me inside that building, hidden just out of sight, and that I might never find out how he got in or what he wanted. I have now worked for my employer for a considerable amount of time. It's probably been around 6 years now. Thanks to the amount of time I've put in, I have seniority over the other associates. In addition, my credentials and training are far more extensive than theirs. The business just secured a new contract for a sizable federal office complex. Given that it is a government office building, its location seems a bit odd. I won't name specific places, but to give you a sense of the area it's in, let me tell you that it's really out in the middle of nowhere, which is what makes it so odd. There's a massive 6-story skyscraper with a massive parking lot all around it. A metal fence that is roughly 10 feet high encloses the parking area. The fence has barbed wire on top of it. In front of the building, at the intersection of the parking lot and the side road it is situated off of, there is only one entrance and one exit. The major road that goes to the highway is roughly 3 miles from the side road. The woods entirely enclose the fence. 4 miles around, there are genuinely no homes, buildings, or other indications of civilization. My seniority allows me to work the days and shifts I choose. I usually decide to work in the mornings or nights and take Fridays and Saturdays off. But regrettably, we began to struggle to retain the evening workers after a few months of starting this new contract. Every day of the week, roughly 3 guards are on duty during the day. There are 2 guards working the overnight shift on weekdays, and on the overnight shift during the weekend, starting Friday to Sunday, there's only 1 guard. Before I continue, I should point out that every guard is armed during every shift. We're experiencing problems keeping individuals on the overnight shift, mostly on the weekend overnight shift. As I mentioned, my supervisor requested me to assist until they could hire more staff and put in some more hours on the weekend overnight shifts as a result. I could have declined, and looking back, Primera Soho Dabe. However, I was truly in need of the additional funds at the time because I was about to move into a new apartment shortly. I therefore accepted the additional shifts. The first few weeks went smoothly. Nothing odd, no problems. However, the events of the 3rd weekend caused me to second-guess my choice to work overtime. It was around 2 a.m. on a Saturday. Outside, there was a terrible thunderstorm. On the upper floor, I was seated in the camera control room. A window in the control room looks out into the rear portion of the parking lot. In the room, there are 3 large-sized computer screens that show the CCTV live feeds from all the cameras installed throughout the building, as well as the few cameras that are outside in the parking lot and by the entrance exit of the parking lot. While working alone overnight, I was sitting in the control room going about my daily business. I was playing games on my Game Boy and viewing movies that I had already downloaded on my phone with the lights off. I got up to stretch my legs and move about, a little after sitting still for a while. Additionally, I was beginning to feel a little drowsy and considered getting an energy drink from the vending machine down the hall. I got up and stretched my legs by walking about the control room for a while before going to the window and looking out through the blinds. I watched, taking in the odd trash being blown about by the strong wind and rain. I was going to leave the window to get that energy drink when the landscape beyond the fence was suddenly illuminated by a burst of lightning. At that moment, I noticed a figure scurrying away from it, from one tree to another, 20 feet, I would estimate. I remained where I was, gazing through the blinds in that direction, waiting for another lightning strike to see if I could see what it was, or if my eyes were deceiving me. Another flash occurred after a few seconds had passed. This time, I didn't notice anything close to or surrounding the tree where the person was moving. At that moment, I realized that my eyes were simply deceiving me and that I was simply exhausted. I grabbed the energy drink and headed down the corridor after leaving from the window. I gulped it down right away in the hopes that it would start working shortly. By the time I walked back to the control room, which took barely 5 minutes or so, I had finished it. When I returned to the control room, I saw right away that one of the screens was showing a camera feed that had been knocked out. The window was oblivious to the camera feed to the rear portion of the parking lot. I moved toward the window and peered out the blinds toward the camera. I saw it hanging from its wires from the post it was attached to, dangling in the breeze. I assumed it must have been knocked off somehow by the strong gusts. After finishing my nightly report and settling back at my desk, I resumed my initial task. After watching a video on my phone for a few minutes, I heard the alarm sound that the system makes when someone enters a section of the building that needs a code that must be input on a keypad. I glanced at the main screen and selected the page displaying the building's access points. It indicated to me that the one being accessed was the one by the rear parking lot of the building. I became aware that someone was outside at that moment, and a chill went down my spine. After the camera was knocked out, the shadow figure appeared, and now the keypad is being accessed. Since somebody gained access and the system gave me the all clear, whoever it was had the code. It couldn't be another employee or security guard, I reasoned. If it was an employee, we would have a memo outlining their identity, their expected arrival times, and the area of the facility they would be in. I would also have realized that it wasn't a security guard, so I knew. I tried to call the police using the phone that was on my desk, but it was out. Naturally, there was no service when I checked my phone. I reasoned that trying to gain service on my phone while moving across the hallway would be the best course of action. I walked out into the hallway from the control room. With my phone in hand, I headed down the hall, toward the service stairway, in the hopes of receiving a signal shortly. I was staring down at my phone when the power abruptly cut off. Since I was so near to the stairs, I made the snap decision to dash out the door to my truck and down the stairs to the main lobby. I arrived at the stairwell and unlocked it. It was almost completely dark inside. I made the decision to move stealthily down the stairs and take advantage of the darkness. I reasoned that whoever had turned off the electricity must have been in the basement's generator room. Regretfully, the only flight of stairs below the lobby where I was going was to the basement. Additionally, the generator was close to the stairs where I was. After descending to the 4th level, I heard a door at the bottom of the stairway open. I came to an abrupt stop. I was aware that I was armed at this time, but I wasn't sure I was prepared to shoot somebody despite having had training. I prayed and hoped that would not be the case. I was deep in concentration as I stood there thinking about my gun training when I heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. I didn't waste any time in devising a fresh strategy. I intended to turn around and return to the 6th floor, where I had come from, as swiftly and silently as I could. A ladder that leads up to the hatch that leads to the building's roof is located at the top of the steps, a few feet past the door, but still in the staircase, just before you had to open the hatch to proceed on. I was going to scale the ladder to the top and hide within the complete darkness till whatever comes next. I did exactly that, and turned around. There was a loud clank as my rifle struck the metal railing of the stairs. When it occurred, both the heavy footsteps and I froze. After a few seconds, I heard the person sprinting up the stairs as quickly as they could, running up the stairs as if my life depended on it. I sprang as quickly as I could. I thought of a last-minute diversion as I reached the top of the stairs, right before I was going to pass the door from which I had come. I loudly and forcefully opened the door, then released the handle. allowing it to smash and close on its own. I kept running till I reached the ladder and ascended it. I would give the impression that I had hurried out the door by doing that. I made it up the ladder in the last few seconds. Distracted by the door's strategy, the man opened it without even glancing at me. The heavy door behind him closed as he dashed into the hall. That's when I realized my opportunity. With a loud thud as my feet reached the floor, I leapt down from the ladder, which was only 10 feet high. I ran toward the stairs. I had just descended one floor when I heard the door open once more and the sound of the man's footsteps thumping down behind me, so I knew he must have heard it. We were both running as quickly as we could. I was able to maintain a one-floor lead over him the whole time. I was suddenly lucky when I arrived at the lobby. There was a tremendous crash behind me, followed by a howl of agony. Though I wasn't positive, I believed the man fell on the steps after tripping. I had no intention of waiting around to make sure. I rushed to the entryway, sprinted through the door, and unlocked it with my key. Luckily, my truck was always parked nearby. As I ran across the lot, I unlocked the doors and pressed the fob to start the engine despite the howling wind and pouring rain. I got into the truck and threw it in reverse when I saw him emerge from the building, rushing toward my car while wearing all black and with a mask and hood over his face. With tires squealing, I put the gear into drive and sped out of the lot into the side road. I didn't get a signal on my phone until I was almost at the major road. I phoned the cops right away. I followed them back to the building after they arrived, which was perhaps 15 minutes later. I filled out reports for both my business and them, telling them everything. Nothing was found despite our thorough investigation of the premises and its surrounding. When they examined the stairwell, it was the most terrifying part. It seems like the man dropped something after falling. A fully loaded, unregistered, semi-automatic weapon was found by the police. Why someone would have broken into the building is still a mystery. Apart from the fact that it was government property, there was nothing especially noteworthy about it. In any event, I'm just grateful that I had good fortune that evening. I experienced this a few days ago. In actuality, it was my first night of mobile security guard training. Before I share my tale, I would like to make it clear that a mobile security guard is essentially a security guard who travels in a car and visits locations where clients require security. The GTA of Toronto is involved in this instance, but the incident happened at a local Mississauga pharmacy medical facility. On my first night as a trainee, I was shown around by my pleasant supervisor on how to disable fire alarms, prepare reports, do patrols, and do other tasks. When an alarm goes off, dispatch usually calls us over the radio and requests that we come to the location of the alert. There was no alert though, because we were there to perform a routine perimeter patrol at the Mississauga Medical Clinic. Around 1:15 a.m., we arrived at the location to confirm that everything was as it should be. However, as we exited the car and drew closer to the structure, we realized that something was seriously amiss. The underground parking garage was left open, to start, and two, the building's front entrance was smashed open. Then my boss asked, "How in the world is this possible? The alarm should sound in the event of a break-in." Since this was my first visit to the location, I was unsure of how to respond. Additionally, my boss claims that the security firm I work for received this new contract. We entered the building with caution. Suddenly, though, my boss says, "Look at the elevator. It is increasing at many levels." He was serious, as it turned out. I questioned my supervisor about if he believed there was someone inside while the elevator went from G1, 2, and 3, and then stopped at level 4, the highest floor. He takes out his baton and nods instantly. I started breathing heavily and felt ill to my stomach at that precise time. I didn't want to be in my job at that moment because I loathed it. We entered the elevator right away and proceeded directly to the top floor. Just as the elevator door was ready to open, I started to feel uneasy and had a rush of adrenaline. I was asking myself, what if something happens? Or whoever this person or thing is might not leave without a fight and possibly even charge at us as the elevator door opens. While we were climbing each level, fortunately, there was nobody in front of us when we reached the 4th story, but it was still quite dark. Thus, we switched on the lights and began looking at the rooms on that floor. My boss advised me to stay with him because he was also uneasy. "Make sure you stick with me and get ready to bust this fuck," he said, to paraphrase. Fortunately, nobody was around. So, until we heard footsteps coming down the stairwell, we were completely taken aback and had no idea what was going on. My boss and I were going to open the stairway door and go after whoever was inside. But then the footsteps ceased, and the silence descended. All we could hear was each other's respiration. I will always remember and can't stop thinking about what my supervisor said to dispatch after that. Call C25 on a 4. Proceed. We require an instant backup dispatch. Please be aware that there is someone in the building with us who is hidden below. They may be armed and are waiting for us to approach them so they can ambush us. The dispatcher then instructs us to remain in our current location and refrain from approaching the suspect or whoever was downstairs, because backup would be there soon. My supervisor began to panic at that moment, which just made matters worse. He ought to take the initiative and not be concerned, after all. However, I don't hold it against him because I found this experience to be terrifying and overwhelming. Since I'm only a few years older than my supervisor, I prefer to call him bro rather than sir or something similar. Just don't worry, bro. I assured him that backup would be arriving soon. You may be wondering why we were unable to flee by hitting the exit. As you can see, the suspect might be anywhere because he is on the ground floor. He or she might become frightened by the elevator's noises and instantly stand in front of it, obstructing our path. The suspect might come upstairs to confront us, but I suppose he or they thought we would surprise him with an attack. Perhaps it explains why he was waiting for us downstairs in silence at the corner. After 15 minutes, we heard the door open. The words of our senior supervisor resounded. Security. We're upstairs, sir. My supervisor radioed him. Take caution. There is a person downstairs. The senior supervisor visited us upstairs a short while later and invited us to join him in his investigation, so we did. However, we searched every story and downstairs, but we couldn't find anyone. We heard the front door open and heard footsteps running outside as we were on the 3rd level, looking in every room and restroom to make sure the individual was there. By the time we reached the ground floor, the suspect had left, so we were unable to identify them quickly enough. After searching everywhere and finding no one, my supervisor and I were both in disbelief. Either the medical clinic was haunted, or the person was in a very good hiding place. I doubt I'll ever find out. However, this was the most horrifying thing I have ever experienced in my life, and this weekend, I'll return for another site visit. But by myself this time, since man will be training me.